Just wait a couple of minutes for others to join, and then we'll get started. Great. I see one of our two presenters. Oh, no, our two presenters are there. Great. Excellent. So I guess maybe one more minute and then we'll get started if that's okay. Lynn, you're fuzzy and not fuzzy and fuzzy and not fuzzy.
I'm also on mute, sorry. I don't know what my camera does that. It zooms in and out constantly and I don't know how to fix it.
No worries.
I jiggle it around and I fiddled with the lights in my office, but I apologize. It's probably going to do that.
Hey, at least you're here. I've had lots of WebEx fails lately, so it's all good.
I don't know what's the problem with WebEx after the update, because if I go to today, I don't see today's calendar. It's some other appointments scheduled there.
Oh no.
Hmm.
I think my problem's with camera. I'll have to hit up the dean's office for a new camera.
I heard they got lots of money.
Yes.
Okay, well, seems like there are people joining, and so I guess we can get started. In the first few minutes, even if you miss it, it's just me chatting, or speaking, so it's nothing to worry about. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jacqueline Blundell, and I am the Acting Associate Dean of Science, Research and Graduate Studies. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and culture of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of the province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territories. Thank you. So welcome to our On the Menu, which is a Lunch and Learn series hosted by the Faculty of Science. Our On the Menu is a full course meal covering a wide and comprehensive range of tasty topics. In the months ahead, we intend to offer a variety of these sessions, which we hope will be of benefit to both faculty and students. So be sure to keep an eye out for news about our next session. We're also interested in hearing your ideas, so if you have any suggestions for future sessions, please feel free to let me know or submit them in the chat or email us at science@mun.ca. Today, we are discussing tips for preparing your NSERC Discovery Grant application, as well as a brief description about the RTI program. I can't believe it's that time of year already. In this session, the Faculty of Science Grants Facilitation team so Drs. Jennifer Major and Lynn Frizzell, and behind the scenes, Philip McCallum, will survey the NSERC Discovery Grant application process, discuss evaluation criteria, go over important changes to some NSERC guidelines, describe and differentiate between internal comprehensive compliance and peer review, and share helpful application tips. We are also pleased to have Memorial faculty members here with experience on the NSERC evaluation panels. And so we appreciate your time, and they're here to help answer any questions. Before we get started, a reminder to all participants to turn off your mics and cameras, please. The only cameras we would like to have on for the event are the presenters. And if you have a question, though, you can certainly turn on your camera. Following the presentation, we will be entertaining questions from the audience. You can either write your question in the chat or write question in the chat, and I'll call on you. At that time, you can turn on your mic and camera, of course. Please be sure to keep your questions brief so we can get through as many as possible. I will remind everyone attending that we are also recording this event, and the video will be made public on our website and on our Faculty of Science YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And so with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Frizzell to, I think, get the presentation started. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks to everyone here for attending. As Jacqueline said, I'm Lynn Frizzell. I'm one of 3 grants officers here in Faculty of Science. Jen Major will also share some tips with you today. And Philip is working behind the scenes and monitoring the chat. So he and Jacqueline will call upon you if you have a question, or you can type it in there and they can read it for you. As the grants facilitation team for the Faculty of Science, it's our job to support your efforts to fund your program of research. So today we're focusing on one of the main sources of that funding, which is the Discovery Grants competition. When you're writing your grant, please keep in mind the goals of the Discovery Grant program, which is to fund original programs of research with a vision, a long-term vision, and clearly articulated long-term and short-term goals that will help you to advance knowledge, discovery, and innovation, and to train the next generation of scientists, your HQP, in natural sciences and engineering. What can we do as the grants facilitation team to help you with your discovery grant application? Well, we can provide a review of your grant application. We can try to answer any questions you may have as you're working on it. We've read many discovery grants. We have lots of samples we can consult. We know the guidelines well, or will certainly by the time the applications start to come in. And what we don't know, we will certainly try to find out. We provide 2 kinds of review, comprehensive review and a compliance review. For comprehensive review, we will give your grant application a careful read. We'll make sure you have addressed the merit review criteria. And that is that you've highlighted and demonstrated your excellence as a researcher and highlighted your contributions. Don't just let them sit in your CCV. Highlight them and discuss them in your application. We look to see that you have a well-presented HQP training philosophy and an HQP training plan, and that you have woven in the requirements for addressing equity, diversity, inclusion throughout that. We'll look to see that your proposal highlights your work in NSE. In case your work crosses over into CIHR or SHRC territory, we can help you to make sure that it's well situated within natural sciences and engineering. We'll look to see this presented as a program of research, a long-term vision, not just a project or collection of projects. We'll look to see that it's well organized and structured to highlight the points that busy reviewers will be looking for. The way that you structure it really matters when they only have a few minutes to look at it. So we'll look to see that you've really highlighted and included explicitly stated long-term goals, short-term goals, how your HQP are going to fit in, what your expected discoveries are, and the impact of your work. Then we'll look at whether or not it's cohesive. Make sure all the parts agree. This is an example I've given before because I see it many times. Make sure that the number of HQP you say you're going to train in your training plan is the same number that are mentioned in assigned projects in your proposal, And that's the same number that you're asking for funding in your budget. So we'll make sure that it's cohesive in that way. We'll look to see that you follow the presentation standards. There are presentation standards, very fussy ones on fonts and margins and so on. We'll make sure that you're in line with those. We'll give it a good read. Make sure it's easy to read. It's clear. It's not too technical or jargon heavy. Not everyone who's going to review your grant is an expert in your niche area. So it has to be clear and not too heavy on the jargon. And of course, we'll make sure that we'll do our best to make sure it's error-free. What we may not be able to do is provide feedback on the content. We are not experts in your field. So for that reason, we encourage you to get a peer review. So if you're new to Memorial and you don't know anyone who can provide that good constructive feedback to you, please contact your department head or contact Jacqueline or ADSR, and she'll be happy to find someone who can provide that peer review to you. We also provide compliance review, which is mandatory. It is the policy of the Faculty of Science that no application can be submitted that has not at least been read and reviewed for compliance. So compliance review is done to ensure that you're eligible. So that would be, for example, that you hold at least, if you're a term person, contract person, you have at least a 3-year contract in effect, that it has not expired. That all the sections of the application are there, that it's complete, and that you've followed the rules. So if you have other funding, you've acknowledged that in your relationship to other funding, and that you're not including contributions that predate the 6 years, which for this year will be 2016 and onward. And we'll also look at, we're also here to help you with the RIG, making sure that you're in alignment with the Research Impacting Indigenous Groups policy. AIP will be required at the time of, which is approval in principle for the submission of your application. So please contact us and we can assist you with that. All right, so what are the deadlines and processes for internal review and submission? First of all, the most important thing you need to do is complete the notice of intent. You need to complete that on the NSERC portal by August 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You must submit an NOI in order to apply. You cannot submit an application if you have not submitted an NOI. So if you're undecided about whether or not you're going to apply, that's okay. Submit the NOI anyway. If you change your mind later, that's okay. You don't need to do anything. It'd be nice if you alerted us, so we won't be expecting your application, but you don't need to alert NSERC. No internal review is required for the NOI, and nothing is required to go on the MUN Researcher or Romeo portal. The next step is to complete a draft. And it would be good to get that started on the NSERC portal and on the Romeo portal. Engage with us to take advantage of our comprehensive review. The deadline for that is September 13th. We will get many applications, so that may seem early, but we could get 40 applications. We will endeavor to provide as much review as possible, as time permits, whenever we receive the applications. And again, getting started early allows you to get that peer review. That's really important. When you've completed an application, and by October 11th at the latest, you must submit your application on the NSERC portal and on Romeo. When you submit on the NSERC portal, you'll get a received by administrator message. That's us. That's internal. So if anything needs to change after we've done our review, we can send it back to you. You can make changes. Once it's finalized and you give us the okay, we will submit it to NSERC. At that point in time, it will say received by an agency, and it can no longer be returned to you. The purpose for submitting on the MUN portal on Romeo is for departmental approval or an internal record, and it's also the route for your account setup once you get your Discovery Grant. And just a note, RGCS, the former RGCS, now Research Initiatives and Services, RIS, is not involved in the review process, the approval or submission of Discovery Grants. That rests with the faculty. And I would just like to mention that we have many, many resources to help you. So please reach out to us. We can provide you help with EDI, budget. Please read the peer review manual, have the merit review criteria in front of you, visit our on the menu page and see the top tips from Chris Paduska last year. It's extremely helpful. Keep those resources in mind, and also note that the NSERC webinars are coming up, so the dates are all there. Just like to make another note on the notice of intent. A couple of tips for that. The purpose of the notice of intent is for NSERC to assign the evaluation group and to select reviewers. So you're going to want to pay careful attention to the evaluation group that you select. You want to choose good keywords, because it's these keywords that the evaluation group members use to find external reviewers. And likewise, choose your suggested reviewers carefully to make sure they're a good fit for you. And now I think I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Lynn. This slide is just giving you a brief overview of all the different parts that come with the NSERC Discovery Grant. I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see that it is quite extensive. So there are a lot of different parts to it, and it's best if you can get started as early as possible because it is a very big project, and you'll realize if you leave it to the end, you're going to be scrambling a bit. Next slide, Phil. You saw that there are all those different parts to the application, and there's actually 3 main criteria by which you're being evaluated by your evaluation group and also by your external reviewers. Although they don't get a vote, they just get to write a report to inform the evaluation group. So the 3 main parts are excellence of the researcher. So this mainly comes from your most significant contributions, as well as your CCV, other additional contributions that you have included. You have your proposal itself, and you also have 1/3 of your grade, your mark, is the contribution to training of highly qualified personnel. So that includes a training philosophy, a training plan for the HQP in this proposal, and also you get to reflect on your past contributions to training. So keep in mind that all of these 3 parts are equal. So don't spend all of your time on your proposal. It is very important, but you also are going to need to spend a lot of time on the other 2 areas as well. This is the merit grid that the reviewers will be looking at when they're looking at your proposal. You probably can't see everything on here, and that's fine. It's just to show you that there are the 3 main areas: the HQP, the proposal itself, and the excellence of the researcher. And if you have this open or available to you, you can see exactly what they're looking for. You need to get at least strong in all 3 areas in order to get funding. With the exception that early career researchers are allowed to have a moderate rating in their training of highly qualified personnel, and that's because NSERC recognizes that you haven't had a lot of time to train HQP in the past. So we have some kind of top tips for you, which Lynn has kind of talked about some of them, but that really shows how important they are. We highly recommend that you get a peer review of your proposal. As Lynn mentioned, we may or may not be experts in your field. We are highly knowledgeable and we've read a lot of NSERC grants, but we don't know the ins and outs of your field. Keep in mind that your reviewers, especially your EG readers, so not your external reviewers, but the people that are actually on the evaluation committee, they might not be experts in your field either. So while they should have a pretty good breadth of knowledge in your general area, they're not experts in your exact field necessarily either. So make sure that you don't put in too much jargon, or if you do, make sure that you define it. Make sure that you're being very clear in what you're doing. As I mentioned, I highly recommend that you use the evaluation grid and that you read the instructions for peer review. That will really help you to drill down, to use the keywords that they're looking for to make it really easy, to make sure you've addressed everything and make the reviewer's job easier. One thing that we often see is that researchers haven't had the time to update their CCV. And we also know that the CCV is not a super friendly program to use. So make sure that you start early. You can also use your CCV to add things that aren't really part of any other part of the application process. So make sure that, for example, if your research crosses over with CIHR or SERC, and you have a paper that you've published that was potentially like in a health research, make sure that you can add in a little note explaining the NSE content of it. You could say that, you know, while it has health applications and was published in this particular journal, you could indicate that 80% of the work was NSE and you worked on the method development, which was all NSE. You can also use this to talk about any specialized content that a reviewer might not know if they're not in your field. So you can use all those note spaces in the CCV. I'm going to go a little bit more into these next couple things, Lynn and I, but make sure that you structure your application well, and make sure that you intentionally address equity, diversity, and inclusion. So this can be in multiple parts. The most obvious and easy way that you must address it is in your training plan and your training philosophy. But you can also address it in your contributions to science, whether it be in the most significant contributions area or your past contributions to HQP training. And you could also address it in your proposal itself by looking at sex or gender based analysis in your proposal. And our kind of final tip is to really highlight your impact. Make sure that you spell it out, how your research that you're doing in this proposal and your past contributions have had an impact on your field in science, how it's impacted Canada and Canadians, and how it's impacted your trainees. So in terms of structure, keep in mind that the people on the evaluation group are reading 40+ applications, so you want to make it easy for them. Use headings and subheadings so that they can easily find things that they're searching for in the peer review manual and on the merit criteria. Clearly identify your research questions or objectives, your hypothesis, state which HQP are involved in different areas, and use your bold, italics, and underline to make it really easy to find these things. Make sure that you use your white space and use diagrams and tables if you can. I know you can't always for everything, but when a reviewer sees that you are using the entire page, there's no white space, your things are justified to the maximum limit, they're not going to be super excited to read your proposal. It can be a little bit daunting, so making it really easy for them to read through and identify things is going to make them be in a better mood. It's going to make them be able to identify things faster and be able to make your case when they have just about maybe 5 or 10 minutes to talk about your application when the EG panel meets. Also want to make it clear that, as Lynn mentioned, the Discovery Grant should be a long-term vision. So not only do you need to identify your short-term objectives, which most researchers are very good at, but make sure that you tie it into your long-term vision and goals. So don't forget about those long-term objectives as well. Also, as Lynn mentioned, make sure that all of your sections agree. If you wrote in your past contributions to training that you've had 20 PhD students, that would be way too many. I don't know why I said that number. Maybe you've had 20 undergrad students in the last 6 years. Make sure that you have 20 undergrads listed in your CCV. Those things, I mean, I don't think they'll make or break you, but you want to show that you have an attention to detail, that everything is really, really well thought out. And that will just show that the feasibility of your proposal is high because you put a lot of thought into it. So make sure that you look for those numbers and make sure everything agrees. I'm going to pass it off to Lynn, who's going to talk a bit about equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Jan. So equity, diversity, inclusion is, actions to address equity, diversity, inclusion is a relatively new requirement for NSERC. I'm not sure when it started. I think it might have been 2020. The goal of this initiative from NSERC is to increase diversity in the research enterprise, the diversity of individuals who are conducting research and participating, which in turn increases the quality, the social relevance, the breadth of problems that can be addressed, and the impact of the research. So you must address EDI in your application. Most importantly, as Jen mentioned, in your HQP training philosophy and HQP training plan, but also throughout your proposal. So if sex, gender, diversity are applicable variables, include that in your methodology. If you have made EDI contributions in the past, you've conducted outreach, you have been involved in WISE NL, You can include these in your past contributions to HQP and most significant contributions. So how do you address EDI in your application? It's really important that you show that you recognize that some groups may face greater challenges or barriers to inclusion and to their success and are therefore underrepresented. You must identify specific barriers or challenges that exist in your field of work, at your institution, and most specifically in your group, in your own lab and research group. Then you have to present a plan with very specific actions for how you're going to reduce these barriers and challenges. What you're not required to do or expected to provide is a demographic profile of your group. That is not needed and not sufficient. It's about the actions that you will take to increase inclusion and diversity, how you are going to make things equitable. Philip, if you can go, there we go. And so here's a nice illustration. Many of you have probably seen this about the difference between equal treatment and equitable treatment. So when you're being equitable, you're providing what people need so that they can participate equally. On the next slide, Philip, please, are some ideas and examples. So you can talk about institutional initiatives and policies and resources. Also, it's good to look at what professional organizations, societies in your area are doing. They may have some resources available for you and may have statistics available about equity or diversity within your field to identify what the problem is, and then you can address the problem. At the Memorial University level, we have a vice provost, for example, of EDI, and it is their job to work on anti-racism and indigenization and EDI efforts. On campus, we have many resources through student life, including the Blunden Center. The School of Graduate Studies has the EDGE program, which offers a lot of professional development programs. We have an internationalization office. There are ESL programs. There's a writing center, a childcare center. There's employment programs. There's a multitude of programs on campus that you can include and make your students aware of so that they can be successful and feel included. You should also check with your department. There are many departments I know have established EDI committees, so be sure to consult with your department to find out if there are initiatives happening. Most importantly, though, is the plan that what you will do for your HQP in your particular group to create an inclusive training environment that supports the success of all. And there's some examples here, how you recruit students, making that a standardized process to eliminate any bias, engaging in outreach, providing accommodations so that you meet the special needs of your HQP that makes them feel included. Policies on family responsibilities, religious holidays, how you might accommodate students who have disabilities. You can have a lab charter or a lab policy on EDI, where you include a code of conduct, or you have a policy on flexible hours, how you're going to assign authorship. You may require everyone in your lab to participate in unconscious bias. These are just some examples. There are many examples. And please, if you engage with us early, we can provide you with lots of help on that. Back to Jane.
Hi again. So the other thing that we really want to share with you that's kind of new is that in alignment with new policies on addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion in academia and in research, NSERC has provided updated guidelines on how to assess contributions to the field and to training. And I think we have a link in the presentation earlier where a broader range of contributions are now, not that they couldn't be assessed before, but it's reviewers are going to be given these new guidelines to show that there are many different ways that your research and what you do can impact science, can impact society. And so you can kind of think outside the box about different ways beyond publications and conference proceedings of how you have impacted your field. The major areas where you can talk about these contributions would be in your most significant contributions area. This is very important. As Lynn mentioned, you are supposed to discuss things only in the past 6 years, but there is a caveat to that. If that work or those contributions are still highly relevant to society, they're being used, they're being cited, you created a new way of doing things that's being uptaken now, or it's directly relevant to your current research that you're proposing, you can go beyond that 6-year window. Make sure that you clearly state the impact here. If you just write a list of all the papers that you have and you assume that the reviewers are going to know how impactful this is, that's not going to do you much service. Make sure that you spell it out. The reviewers are busy, they're tired, and they're not experts in your field. So spell it right out for them, even if it feels kind of silly. That's usually the #1 thing we're telling researchers to do. So make sure that you identify the stakeholders or the end users who your research is valuable to. This could be value to your field, which is usually publications, conferences, if you were invited to speak at a university on your topic, but you can also have many other contributions. So you could have contributions to Canadians. Maybe you did knowledge translation activities, and now people are more engaged or more aware of your topic of research. You could be affecting Canadian industry, creating patents, or government by policies or guidelines that are being shared. So there's lots of different levels that you can be impactful. And also make sure that you can also talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and training and knowledge translation, all these other things that we perhaps aren't the first thing that come to your mind, but these are all very important and they can be woven into your most significant contributions. You get to pick 5, so you could weave them all throughout, or you could even have, I've seen highly successful researchers have one of their top 5 be about HQP training and commitment to EDI. So it depends kind of how it fits for you, but make sure that you address all these different things. Another thing that can make your life a little bit easier is when you're writing your most significant contributions, when you're putting in papers, because you still should, of course, include your papers. You can reference them in your CCV, so you could write Journal 1, Conference 1, 2, etc. That can just make things a little easier, and you won't have to write out the entire citation. Another thing that a lot of researchers don't always use to their full advantage is the additional information section. I think you get an additional 3,000 characters where you can discuss things that basically you haven't had a chance to discuss in other places. This can be especially important if you're in kind of a niche field or a very broad field, and you want to make sure that people understand why you picked authorship. In some field, a PI is always at the end, and some fields, a PI is always at the beginning. So you want to explain things that your reviewers may not be aware of. You could pick why you chose to publish in a specific journal that may be very impactful in your field. You can use this, and I highly recommend that you talk about your collaborations at MUN, across Canada, international. You can also talk about, this might be especially important for newer researchers. If you've had any kind of non-official supervision or collaborations, this can be a good area to sneak a little more of that information in there as well. And talk about your service to science, because that is an impact to science. If you've been serving as a reviewer or an editor, if you created a new workshop or a new initiative in your department, especially in terms of training HQP. Those are all really important contributions, and if you can't fit them in your top 5, you can fit them in here as well. And finally, kind of the last thing I have to say about the contributions is make sure that you embed your contributions and your impact into your proposal as well. As you're discussing each objective, make sure that you state what the impact of that research will be on the field and to Canadians and to the people that you're training. And then you should also have an overall impact section at the end as well. A lot of this information we'll be sharing in our draft proposal that we're preparing, just to kind of give people tips on what to include on which sections, and it'll give you an idea of headings and stuff to use, including the impact section. We also just wanted to briefly touch on the research tools and instrument grants, because it does come pretty much at the exact same time as the NSERC DG. We do have a deadline now of October 17th, which is a little bit after comprehensive DG deadline. You can use this to request equipment up to $150,000. The total cost of the equipment must be between $7,000 and $250,000, and you can apply for up to $150,000. Make sure that you have up-to-date quotes, and that if you have multiple pieces of equipment, make sure that they go together in a comprehensive system. You can't have like a whole bunch of pieces that don't go together. It must support NSE research, and anyone that's listed on the team must hold an NSERC grant or a CRC position, and they must explain how they're using it for their NSE work. Also, their EDI must be addressed in the RTI grant in terms of the HQP training plan, as well as the applicant team itself. So make sure that you are thinking about that for your RTI grant as well. And one thing that's particularly new is that if you are successful as an applicant or even a co-applicant, you can't apply in the next competition. So you'll have to have a gap year between funding. If you're unsuccessful, you can keep applying, but keep that in mind and make sure that your co-applicants are aware of that as well. We also have links here to the RTI webinars that are coming up. And you've got this.
That's great, Jen. Thanks so much to both Lynn and Jen for putting this together. And so I guess we'll move right to questions. Valerie mentioned a mock grant review might be useful. Valerie, did you mean specific to the Discovery Grant or just in general?
I guess I was thinking specific to the Discovery Grant, but I think it's useful for everything, so that just because you really need to get an idea of like what goes into the discussion that makes the decision on like how your grant is going to be binned, and like what do your evaluation group members bring up during that like 15-minute chat that we have. And so I think that's probably super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. We can certainly perhaps think about that for early September, or the summer is always hard to get to navigate people's schedules or vacations, but maybe for a September meeting might be something to do. And that might give us some time to get a mock application together. That's a great idea.
We might even like, you know, if you can get enough evaluation panel members together, we might even do like a mock review without a real application, and just sort of, you know, go through some generic comments that are sort of normal parts of the conversation about a grant. And, you know, how was the EDI? Oh, it was kind of just boilerplate, just tacked on, you know, the kind of things that come up all the time, we could probably do without having an actual grant.
Yeah. Yep. That sounds great. So we'll probably be in touch with those members who are here today to maybe put something like that together. Thanks. Matthew.
I had a question in the chat there.
Yep.
Matt, do you want to repeat that, or?
Hello, yeah, this was just a question regarding the significant contributions area that Jen was discussing. I was just wondering exactly, obviously the CCV has places for actual publications and the contributions, but outside of that, just wondering how the 6-year window kind of operates in terms of scholar significance versus COVID impact, to be honest, and if that's the appropriate place to really discuss the impact of COVID on research productivity and timelines and things like that?
I can take that one. Thanks, Matt, for your question. We're waiting for I'll just preface everything by saying we're waiting for the latest updates and guidelines and so on from NSERC. They have not been released yet. But based on last year, for COVID and any other kind of extension or leave, what you have to do is describe in your CV the leave that you have and why, without any detail, just the amount of time that you've been off and what the nature of the leave was, whether it's or the lost productivity, whether it was due to COVID or family leave or whatever. And then you have to quantify that as a period of time or a percentage of productivity lost. And then you're allowed a 2-page attachment equivalent to that period of time, which can go backwards into 2015 or 2014 and so on, and include contributions on that. Jen, you may have read something sooner when you were doing your contributions slide. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you got that. I have seen that people in their, I think you mean in the most significant contributions part, if you have a accepted leave, like a parental leave or family leave, not talking about COVID here,
Not COVID.
only the other types of leaves, then I would make sure that you write a note for a reminder that, say you're talking about your paper is one of your most significant contributions from like a year before. I would just remind them that, you're going back because you had that delay. But as Lynn said, if it's a COVID-19 related delay, then that can only go in the 2-pager that's separate.
Thank you.
I think I could add a little something to that too. So like this year in the when the evaluation groups met, it was, I would say, for about 3/4 of the people who had sort of COVID delays, the discussion was basically, well, they had a COVID delay, but they weren't specific about exactly what the reason for the delay was and exactly how long it was, and the specifics weren't there. So then there was just kind of a shrug, so like, take it for what it's worth. So I would say if you've got a COVID delay, don't just be like, COVID. Be really specific about my lab was closed from day X to day Y, and this is exactly what happened to this set of experiments. They got put behind by this many months. So just be super specific.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. That's a good point. So I saw things like the daycare was closed, so I couldn't recruit subjects, or my lab was closed, or things like that. The core science building was shut down. So, yeah.
And graduate student recruitment. So your HQP may not be as robust as it has been in the past, and so you might want to highlight that as an issue if you've had difficulty recruiting. That could be another complication.
And students couldn't come. International students weren't able to come. That was another reason that I saw.
So I guess the take home is to be as specific as possible about any delay that you have. Or
yeah, I think we're just used to, in general conversation, just being very general about COVID, right? And that doesn't seem to quite work when it comes to your NSERC grant. You have to be more specific than that. That's
right. So for COVID you do, but for other kinds of leave you don't. You just have to say I took leave for family responsibility. You do not need to go into the details about, and that could correlate with COVID. So if you lost your daycare and you were at home, or you had to care for a parent, you don't have to go into details about anyone's private information.
That's a point too, right? Is that if it's another kind of delay, like a parental leave thing, they will only give you credit for it if you've been on official leave. You can't just be like, I had a baby, but I worked through it as best as I could, but it was rough for 2 years, kind of thing. They don't take that into account. So if your production is going to be like lower, I would strongly recommend people to take an actual leave.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions or any questions? I think that's all in the chat. Did any of the panel members hear something that they thought they could contribute to or add to or disagree with or give any other advice?
Hello.
Hi.
This is Chen. I'm with Faculty of Engineering, but I'm serving on the computer science group. I don't know whether any CS colleagues here, which I can help with some tips here. So I just to comment regarding EDI. I think Lin and Jan has covered very much into it. One thing I would point out is on the EDI, it's listing the past achievement won't be sufficient. Often people, we assume we've done great in EDI training in the past. That itself is a manifestation of how well I do. But the committee want to see a plan. How are you plan to improve, or for the next 5-year term, you plan to work on the EDI. And so EDI plan is not only just for the training philosophy or that section, but also integrate with your proposal. So some point inside your proposal, talk about how the EDI plan are considered in the research program. So that's something I think people like to see. Yeah, and I think a year ago, the emphasis on EDI was more significant in the EG discussion. Basically, I think any proposal not mentioning EDI automatically put to insufficient. But I think last year the tone was slightly changed. So we don't normally put to insufficient if EDI was not talked at all. So that's a little bit change based on the observation over the last 2 years. Yeah, and one thing I think more on the a proposal part, because that's a hard part to comment on. And often, I think, especially for new researchers, we have lots of ideas. So they try to squeeze a lot of work into the proposal. Then becomes the proposal becomes very broad, but lack of focus, lack of concentrate. So I think that's my suggestion here would be focus on the depth rather than the broadness. So you may take out some work, but focusing on the depth of the work. So that's more important, I think. And also people like me, I include myself. Early days, I think I want to propose something new, which I never new means which I never dealt with before. But often the committee will look at what's when they talk about the feasibility of the project. We talk about what you did before. How's that connect to your proposal? So don't propose some brand new things which you never had any work before. And so maybe I was told my senior colleagues when when you get the grant, it's time to think about something brand new which you need never deal with before. And in the next 5 years, you gain enough background experience so that you can claim this is your area. So don't propose something you never did before. And also, I think that's mentioned. So for the impact, it's not straightforward and self-identified. So by listing is not enough. So you need to elaborate on what's impact, even though some of them may be obvious, but explicitly state that would be helpful, because by just the listing may not be sufficient. And I think the committee worked very closely using the grid language. So I think in the look at the grid indicator, the grid language. So in your proposal, if you feel strongly your proposal, say I merit an outstanding. So I think have a summary in the proposal, from place to place. Have some summary sections, so basically say innovative part, methodology, how much the impact of work you expect. So maybe consider using some grid language in your a proposal, so that that makes it easier for the reviewers and also EG members to they may not agree, they may lower that or upgrade that, but I think using some standard language that may be helpful for them to come up, and that's something I found that would be make it easier for others. That will make it easier for yourself. So that's a statement I would make. And typically just a few some comments from the EG meeting. So every proposal receives a 15-minute slot. So basically all the proposals, every single proposal sent to 5 readers, R1 to R5. R1 will have roughly 3 to 4 minutes, maybe sometimes 4 to 5 minutes to elaborate. And then R2 will have 2 to 3, and then R3 to R5, basically 1 to 2 minutes most. So basically often it concluded within 12 minutes. And so it's a very quick process. You don't have lots of time to discuss about details. So making things explicitly clear to the EG members, especially the reviewers, they use as a reference, but EG members are the main deciding factor for the proposal. So make it easier for the readers, actually make it easier for yourself. And one last thing is the decision is not the average of 5, basically 5 members will vote. And the result an application received is not based on the average, it's based on the median. So the middle evaluation will be the final decision given to the proposal. So the 2 higher one, 2 low one will be dropped, basically. Yeah, that's some comments to share. Yeah, thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much, Shen. We really appreciate that. I think that I sit on biological, or I did, on biological systems, and everything you said was pretty consistent with what I have seen on my panel. So it's good to see that there's consistency across the panels. And the last 2 years have been a little bit of an anomaly where we're getting 20 to 30, where we review 20 to 30 applications. So we get them on December 20th approximately, and then our meetings are usually around mid-February. And so that prior to that, and I presume going back to it now this coming year, the evaluation group sees anywhere between 40 and 50 applications. And you saw all the parts. And so please, I cannot overemphasize being particular about your application and making sure everything lines up. And that's where the grants facilitation team really can be helpful. So I encourage all of you to try and meet that September 13th deadline of comprehensive review, because it matters to the people who are reading 40 to 50 of these applications, and they're not experts in these areas, and so it is a task, and so please be mindful of that and take advantage of our and contact us. You don't have to wait till September 13th. If you're submitting and have parts written, you can contact us well in advance of that, and we can give feedback, because if we're anticipating about 40 applications, we have 100 who could possibly, I think that's right, Philip, approximately 100 who could submit. We're expecting around 40. And so that's a lot for us to review. So if you do have parts written earlier, please submit or contact us as soon as possible, I guess. Sorry, I was a little long-winded there. Does anyone, any of the other panel members have points to make or questions raised by any of the applicants or would-be applicants? Yeah, Janet.
Just a couple of things. Lynn and Jen did a great job talking about some of the nuances. And it was interesting sitting on the panel. I sat on from 19 to 21 or 22. Anyway, I wasn't on it this last year, but interesting watching the evolution of the EDI sections in the applicants and how they went from just counting the demographics. I've had 60% females in my group, so I'm okay, to that not being at all acceptable. But one thing that I read in the last year in an applicant from a guy who's well established, but he talked about actively seeking out strong role models for his trainees, because he knew that there were certain things that he couldn't offer the students just by the fact that he was a a male. And so that, and I only ever saw that once, but I thought that was a really interesting thing. You know, he had lots of, did I say trainees or collaborators? Strong female collaborators as role models for his trainees, which I thought was an interesting approach to that. And the other thing is, if you are, you know, I sat on the same panel as you, Jacqueline, in the biological systems and functions with, and my expertise was animal. So there are a lot of applications that come through where the PI has a foot in the CIHR and in the NSERC realms. And a lot of the evaluation group members that don't walk that line, that are purely NSE, carry a pretty big chip on their shoulder sometime, because the CIHR grants are so much bigger and so much more funding. And so it's really, really important that the NSE contributions are totally laid out in a way that cannot be mistaken. And I think that Jen and Lynn can probably help with that. But if you have any hint of health in your research program, it's really important that you make it so clear that certain contributions are in NSE, because I've seen lots of evaluation group members go through and do a fine count with a, you know, fine tooth comb and challenge some of the things that the applicant said were NSE, and that's kind of tough.
Yeah, I know, even from the journal title, they'll
Yeah.
just wipe it out as not a contribution. And so, yeah, that's a fine line. Oof. Thank you very much, Janet. Anyone else have any insight or questions?
Might add a little something.
Yeah, Valerie.
So, I mean, I think Jen and Lynn did a great job of covering all this, so I might just like underline the things that they said about your grant might not be reviewed by experts. It's those 5 people who are rating your grant, maybe one of them will be an expert. And so it is really important to make sure that you're you know, writing in an understandable way for somebody who's not exactly in your field, and that you make it clear why something is exciting, you make it clear what this impact is, because it's not like you might not get an expert. It's like you're absolutely going to get non-experts, and they are the people who are going to like vote on your fate. And the external reviewers will be experts, but those are only sort of lightly taken into account by the evaluation group members, and it's almost just like a reality check, because most external reviewers will be pretty favorable about a grant that's in their area, because it's their area, right? They like it. And so, you know, if the external people point out a flaw in your grant, you know, that's a problem. But most of the time, you know, that's not where the decision is coming from. It's coming from the actual evaluation group members, who are mostly not experts in what you do. So you do have to really make sure it's understandable to people in a broad range of fields.
Great. I would make a comment that I believe then you get to suggest several. I haven't written an NSERC grant in a while. You get to suggest your group of external reviewers. Choose wisely, because if they are negative, it's funny. The evaluation group, at least in my experience, listens to the negative, but sort of brushes away if the external reviewers are super positive. It is terrible, but that's usually what happens. So the way it works is the applicant provides a number, maybe 5, I think, possible external examiners, and then we get to choose from that list, plus our own that the application goes out to. And so please be mindful about who you're choosing. You wouldn't want to choose a competitor, I suppose. Maybe, I don't know. But that's something to keep in mind. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Any other last comments or questions?
I have kind of a question for all previous panel members. If someone is resubmitting, they were unsuccessful, do you have any specific suggestions for them?
Yeah, so I've seen this happen a few different times. Here, I'll turn on my.
I think you muted yourself, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. It will help to have someone go over the comments with you to see what the problems might have been. So we are not able to provide a lot of detail. So for example, if someone gets a moderate or insufficient, there's actually boilerplate language that we're strongly encouraged and almost required to use because they don't want us to be putting things in writing that could be challenging, I think, to back up. So what it means is the feedback you get will look really, really generic, but almost any committee member, and I'm sure Lynn and Jen can help with this too, will be able to translate that boilerplate language into suggestions that you could use for the next time. Many times it's things that you can fix. And even if it's something like excellence of researcher and it sounds like, oh my gosh, I have to go publish another 40 papers, that's not actually what it means. It's probably describing things more. And so there are ways that that can work. And the sooner you talk to someone to get some feedback about it, the better. Because no one will see your application from the previous year. And in fact, it's really hard if you end up reviewing an application 2 years in a row to forget the little bits you remember from the previous ones, but that's what we're asking to do. So you really do get a clean slate, but you get advice. So the intent is not to keep you out of the system. The intent is to bring more people back.
Thanks, Chris. Cheng?
Yeah, just to Chris' point, so basically, I think there's a good chance the committee members, the EG members may handle the same application again, because last year I had 3 applications are returning, but we are not supposed to mention anything about like the previous record, and like we are expected to delete everything after the review. So basically, every returning application will be treated as a brand new application, which has nothing to do with early on. Like so like I don't think we need to overly worry about that. But if the committee, like EG members, continue on serving on the committees, there's a good chance the same application may come back to the same EG, but it will be followed like nothing to have any bias because of previous record. So as Chris mentioned there, the comments to the applicant are very general and vague. So basically, we use some template languages for the decision. So basically, like I think my suggestion would be if a category like the score is like will be more meaningful here, that like the comments provided may be somewhere related to that aspect need to be worked on, but it's phrased very general, so you won't be able to have much idea from there to how to improve. But that's why like I suggest like to look at the grid language. That's the best part to assess the quality of that category. So look at the score and look at the refer to the grid. Basically, like you know which area need to work on. So basically, like the grid will tell you the aspects, and the language, like on the decision letter, may you can just link that to a particular category, and that's the part you know, like you need to work on revising when you revise the proposal. But it will be treated as a brand new proposal. So.
Excellent. Thanks. Okay, it looks like we're at 1. Any last moment or minute points? Did we miss something or don't have any burning questions?
Just want to say again that the slide deck and the video will be posted to the Faculty of Science website later this week, and any other resources, feel free to come to the grants facilitation team anytime.
Right. Perfect. Thanks, Philip. And to follow up on that, thank you so much to the panel members and to Lynn and Jen for putting together this presentation. If you have colleagues who you know are submitting the LOI, please direct them to this webinar, or tell them to get in touch with Lynn, Jen, Philip, or myself. We are eager to get started. We were super successful last year, and we're hoping to even expand that success going forward. So, and I say we, the faculty were really successful with our discovery grants and RTI. So, we can hopefully build on that for next year. Thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we may be back in September on either reviewing a mock review or some tips once the new guidelines come out, or both. Thanks again, and have a lovely week.